in this solo conversation, what I want to share with you is thoughts that have been going through my own mind. And these thoughts were generated by a couple of talks I've gone to in the last month and a half, where constantly the talk is, oh my God, now India is the country the world is looking at. What are we going to be building in the next 10 years? We're going to be building 1 billion square feet. India this, India that. The world is looking at India. And that got me really panicked that, my God, everybody is going to be looking at what India is building. And what am I thinking? Like what am I thinking for this next 10 years? And that's the conversation. It's sort of a half-baked conversation because this is like the first time I'm talking about it. So excuse me if some facts are wrong or I sort of go off track a bit here and there. But these are some of the facts. Actually, I stole some of these facts from Amit, who was speaking just before me. And I looked at these. I said 50 million Indian urban population today, and in the next decade, 68 million urbanized Indians. So we have to design, just in the cities itself, for 18 million people. India will be building 1 billion square feet. Like, you know, zeros are very confusing, and 1 billion is like a kind of an unimaginable number. And 2x amount of energy consumption. And all these figures are related to building. So 2x amount of energy that we'll be using for buildings. 39% of 40 billion tons carbon emissions in 2023 were caused by us, by the construction industry. Okay, 50% construction industry comprises 50% of extraction of natural material. So we kind of worry about just oil and, you know, kind of EV cars we are going into. But look at this, what we're doing. Then at one point I read that, you know, we are, Americans are 10x the amount of per capita consumption of energy than us, and I felt very happy until I realized that our capita emissions, whilst being significantly below, are still the third highest in the world. For me, these things formed the kind of thoughts that I've been having, that what am I going to do with myself in the next 10 years? What is my role? And so far, the role has been, and us in the construction industry have largely contributed to it, is taking the global temperature post-industrialization up by 1 degree centigrade, where probably at 1.5 we'll all be devastated. And essentially, we talk about achieving net zero, but where are we? Where are we in this net zero conversation? I mean, we all talk about energy intensity, that's embodied energy within the products we use. We talk about energy efficiency, but where are we? So this is something for the last 10 years that I've been working within the firm, and sustainability, optimization, unique and livable. But really it needs, given the enormity of the task in the 10 years to come, this is nothing. This is absolutely nothing. And so some of the things that last 2-3 years, especially since COVID, I've been talking about is energy which is metrics driven, not, I mean, to go one step ahead, to actually prove to ourselves that we are heading to net zero, and talking about social inclusivity and sustainability, but is that enough? So I want to talk about I went into my own past, looked at 5 projects where some of this I've practiced, and I want to form, like I formed, along with various people, I formed the philosophy SOUL, which I worked on in all these decades, 2 decades, sustainability, optimization, unique and livable. Now, I don't as yet have an acronym, but I want to introduce to friends, colleagues, professors in the audience that this, I think, is the basis of the next 10 years for me. And this is the first time I'm going to talk about it. So the first is metric-driven sustainable design. So I was fortunate to build this project, which is the world's largest office building during COVID. And then in conversation with Amit again, 2 weeks ago, I realized that if I could build 142 such buildings, then the entire building target of India for next 10 years is done. So if one practice with about 16 architects could build a building which is using 50% of the energy that the best green targets allow for, Of course, 50% is also not good enough. It should be net zero. But if one practice can do this, I mean, just this room full of people can build all of India in a more sustainable way. So this project taught me about metrics-driven design because the budgets were so tight and the entire money was in the bank before the project started. And the vision was larger than life. So, I mean, we'd been working in the field of reducing energy, but we really had to reduce energy to actually meet the cost, leave alone a grand idea of going to net zero. But the building was not buildable if certain metrics were not achieved. This building is for 65,000 people who come into work every day. Yeah, so all sorts of saving, including saving of human energy, which is calculating how 65,000 people get into a building every day in the first 15 minutes between 9 and 9:15. And the only way to build this project was 15% saving in capital expenditure and 50% saving in operational expenditure. So energy performance was 45 kilowatt hour per square meter per year. That's what we achieved. This is less than 50% of the green standards, which would be acceptable. So examining LEEDs Gold, which was the client mandate, examining LEEDs Platinum, even with that, we would never achieve the cost of the project. So we had to go beyond that. So numbers were what helped us. Why I say metric-driven design? The numbers were decided first, the design came later. And as the next decade is going to be about net zero, zero is a number. So I have reversed my design philosophy. It is number first. It's going to sound horrible, so don't just read it for just this one sentence that I'm going to say. For me, it's going to be a decade of number first, design follows. So this was a collective dream of 65,000 strong people to alleviate their lives and create an enduring legacy for themselves in the world. And this is the project, and this project was designed numbers first. So of course, the elementary principles of sustainability that we all studied through Kinnisberger in second year and have developed over almost 3 decades of practice, all of those stay. So it's not that aesthetics disappears, passive design disappears, none of that disappears, but that by now is given. If I don't know that in 3 decades of practice, then too bad, that's really sad. So the new idea is numbers-driven design. So this is where innovation came in. It's Indian, it's indigenous, and it's ingenious, working together with the engineers. Radiant cooling, so such a large project, 42% area, I think, is in circulation, and none of it is air-conditioned. All of it is radiant cooled. And radiant cooling had been introduced to in Germany about 6-7 years ago, but very expensive to do here, till we made it here on site. So these holes in the building, Jolly inspired, so reminding you not forgetting design and not forgetting heritage. Jolly inspired, so the entire building is ventilated. None of these holes have any glass in it. And when designing buildings to this scale, so there's no corridors, they're only urban spaces. So this is internal urban spaces, internal gardens, internal spaces for people to move. This is the primary circulation of the project. The project as it stands finished and inaugurated in December, a couple of months ago. Just some images to give you a sense of scale. Okay, now I go to a really small project. This idea was something that happened, again, by building a building during COVID that never stopped construction because it was in the middle of a hill, or rather on top of a little hill that no one was bothered about. Had about 60 or 80 huts on the village, that's about it. So this is the entire production facility for Forest Essentials. Most of us use some product or the other from there. And this building is completely off-grid and was built during COVID. And what got me thinking that this building never stopped building, because when the few labor that was there disappeared, then the people from the villages built it, because most of them have employment in this factory. in some form or the other, direct or indirect, and kind of local, the dhaji kind of stonework we used so that they could build it. And then I realized that if a very successful company can continue operations, work in an off-grid building, and can get built by just people around, I mean, and who seriously walk to work, then maybe we need to actually question the idea of this kind of urbanization figures that I've just shared. Like, why doesn't work just happen? Why don't we come up with a more decentralized urban plan? I know that in India it's mostly policymakers who do that, but this is a conversation I've been having with myself. So energy positive building by just solar panels. So therefore it also gets used as a school in the evening because it's energy positive, and in the day it does production, and in the evening because a lot of the huts don't have as the same conditions to study. So a lot of them study here, indigenous materials, techniques used, and 100% of the products sold in 80 countries can be produced in this condition. And because they're invested in by a major international brand, Estee Lauder, so all conditions that are required for international ratings of the kind of product that has happened here are met. So it is really a building for the people, by the people, and built by the people, and every household on this hill of Lodzi, somebody or the other comes here to work directly or indirectly. So this is my next preoccupation, or is going to be for the next decade, decentralized growth. If such successful companies can happen in that way, then why not a lot more? Third, socio-cultural sustainability is my next conversation. So this started in 2008 with a project called Pearl Academy of Fashion built outside Jaipur. And this conversation happened again because of lack of budget. So every little technique that could save money was looked at. I think Shruti sitting here in the audience in the front row worked on this project. And so this, potters making pots, using it for insulation and also using it to kind of create flat soffits by inverting the beam and filling it up with this. You can see the detail, you can see the work in progress. And what I actually called back a few years later, called the client and asked that little colony of potters that we set up, how many were there? So that's the kind of rough information I got. And what I believe is now they go from site to site using the same technique a lot in other institutional buildings in Jaipur. So this was a Rajasthani technique, forgotten, rediscovered, and repopularized. And cheap, effective, the 30 rupees per square foot became 1 rupee 25 paisa per square foot. So for me, it's the cost of building. It's inclusivity, because we are going to be shifting all these people from rural areas to cities in the next 10 years. Then some part of what they bring has to be brought into what is being built. Otherwise, there will be just mind-numbing amount of zero-skill people around us if we rob them of every skill they have. So this is an old project, but the conversation became alive for me more recently about the people who helped with this. Earlier, it was for me always about the architecture, the jali, the matka, but now it is about the people. Because all these people who are going to move into the cities we need to find ways in our architecture to enrich the architecture, not to do social service, but to enrich the architecture using their skill. The fourth, for the lack of a better word, I'm calling it bespoke future. I'm sure over the next few conversations, it will improve the taxonomy I'm using. So this is a project. It's called the ITC Mixed Use Campus. Now they call it Sanskriti Campus. This is half built. It's outside Kolkata. And this was a west-facing facade. So it had to be, as per passive design principles, it had to be a blank facade. So in ideation, it became blank canvases. And this is the project in construction. So this is where 80 craftsperson, their craft is being made relevant today and possible for future. And is being made relevant because certain very tedious tasks which cost labor labor intensive and become very expensive, time intensive, and therefore not possible because we are not in the business of making Taj Mahal today. So half and half. Let's share the burden. So this craft is being made relevant today, but the base cutting, the first cut, happens with CNC, and the style of cladding happens with drywalling. And the fine art on it, the depth, the color, the resin filling, the texturization happens by hand. And so about the first 3 buildings are done, but that's what it will be finally when that happens. So there will be 28 facades, the maximum being 95 meters tall, and there'll be 28 such facades which will be done and finished, showcasing works of artists who were paid to do this, to draw up, and also now have stayed employed for the last 5 years because they build very slowly in Kolkata, and it will probably stay employed for at least another 5. And the last, tradition meets technology. So this was a project finished just 2 or 3 months before COVID hit us. It's the corporate office for Zydus. Again, it's I think west-facing projects give you a lot of opportunity for sculptural work. So this is west-facing on the highway. And so obviously, you blank it out if you can, and that's what we did. No, try to create this fortress which won't let the sun in. And so by doing that, all the energy metrics, which today have gained more importance in my being, so a lot of reduction of energy intake into the building was already done through that process. But I think what is very exciting about this surface is some parametric software, blah, 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 was done by some very cool young architects. And this kind of doubly curving, multiply curving, what I was told, 1,700 different points, kind of shape was created. Whilst it was digitally created, how to build it was another thing altogether. So using some partially flexible shuttering, the wall was put together, but the cladding was hand done because just couldn't figure out a system that we've got these points, we've cast the concrete, which was kind of 10–20% off, but mostly managed to get the curve. But how do we get the corten steel onto it where every trapezoid was different? So this is the building, some cladding inside, some outside. Even the prismatic glass was actually inspired by traditional Gujarati architecture. And this is actual craftsmen working on site, but also inspiration by another craft, which is the Bhunga craft. And actually, when the sun moves, the building constantly looks like it's in movement because this is dichroid film on glass, and hence has the same identity-making quality that mirror work on Bhunga huts have. So this is my last slide. This is the target, and as our Prime Minister has declared that we'll get net zero by 2070, it kind of baffles me. We'll build 1 billion in 10 years, and then I suppose we'll build another 1 billion in the next 10, and another 1 billion, if not more. And if we don't build it net zero today, how will we be net zero in 2070? So how can a target be so far away that actually gives us a license to do any nonsense we feel like till then? It's not possible. Like, we have to be building net zero yesterday. And imagine one more. So I'm very proud of Surat Diamond Bourse that it's achieved a EPI of 45. But imagine if everybody just built 45 EPI buildings. So the math doesn't add up to me. Then how does it become net zero? How does it become a net zero future? So I think with current predictions of urbanization, 2070 will be too late. I think that's an absolutely incorrect figure. Absolutely incorrect. And if we are building 1 billion starting now, simple math says to me that this target is for now. It's not for 2070. So I'd just like to leave the room by saying that I'm going to try better. 45 is just too much energy. 45 EPI is too much energy. That's the best I've done so far, and it's not good enough. And that's what I'm going to leave this room with, and that's what my conversation with myself over the next decade will be. Thank you.